Messiah Complex. Health disclosure. This article contains in-depth discussion of Chris's physical and/or mental health. This page is to not be constructed as a substitute for medical advice or a professional diagnosis. All diagnoses are either taken from outside documentation or based on amateur analysis. I do have a job, dipshit. It is literally called being a literal goddess and protecting as many of your sorry hides from the casualties of the dimensional merge in progress, demonstrating his megalomania. I have my morals, especially being the full reincarnate of Jesus Christ of Nazareth and God of all, including you, Chris, while in jail on an incest charge. A messiah complex is a mental state of those who believe they are or will become saviors. Chris started demonstrating symptoms of this type of psychosis alongside his worsening narcissism and increase in maladaptive coping mechanisms. In the latter half of the 2010s, Chris increasingly started resorting to his fantasy world as a way of coping with the pressures of reality, and, after being influenced by the Idea Guy's cult-like grip, who utilized a parody series about video game deities to manipulate Chris, he gradually built up a belief that these deities really existed in another dimension, and copied the lore about them to make up an imaginary counterpart of himself, with their powers, CPU Blueheart. Chris also attempted, without success, to orchestrate a dimensional merge to unite himself with said counterpart, to gain an array of godlike powers, all as a maladaptive coping mechanism. Following his arrest in August 2021 and subsequent internment, Chris's messiah complex turned literal, possibly influenced by the Bibles given to prisoners in jail. Chris began referring to himself as Jesus Christ and God, even signing a letter as Mrs. Jesus Christ Weston Chandler Sonichu, the goddess Blueheart and Lord of all. Chris also refers to himself as a real player one in his prison letters, which can be interpreted as a belief that he is the most important being in existence, if not a sign of his full-blown, albeit non-philosophical, solipsism. Either way, it can be assumed that Chris views the majority of humankind as beneath him, although he most likely did well before going completely cuckoo. Origin of the Messiah Complex. Main articles: Chris and his ego, narcissistic personality disorder, and Chris and coping. Chris's messiah complex grew out to already existing problems he had, namely his narcissism and his maladaptive coping mechanisms. Since before his discovery, Chris believed he had magic powers. He used to curse people he didn't like men, and bless people who he liked, women. Due to trolls acting like these curses actually worked, Chris got the confirmation that some of his powers were real. He since thought Jesus Christ and God had a special interest in his life, and were appearing in his dreams to help him. In his comics, Chris gave himself godlike powers to beat up people he didn't like, and change in real-life situations where he was punished by authorities to a situation where he won against the authorities, i.e. a Mary Sue. For a long time, comic Chris and real Chris were separate individuals in Chris's mind, but with the coming of the Idea Guys and the Teen Troon Squad, the line between reality and fiction got blurred, and he mixed himself and his self-insert up. As he had to prove to his fans that his newfound magic powers were real, he came up with the most rational solution he could think of, the dimensional merge. This helped blow his messiah complex out of proportion. Dimensional merge. The merge is a concept where two dimensions, one where Chris is a loser and another where he's a god, are merging, where the end result is a single Chris with godlike powers. The Idea Guys created the concept of the merge, and Chris immediately believed it because provided an explanation as to why his powers are activated after 36 years of his miserable existence. This was most likely created as a means of coping from his life, where he was the man of the house and had to take care of his mother, pay bills, and do tasks he considered to be stressful. He also uses the merge to justify why he does nothing daily, and to give himself hope that things might get better in the future. To stroke his ego, and to get confirmation that his godlike powers are being activated, he made his fictional characters worship him. For him, these characters are living, and their worship is equivalent to worship by actual people. Saying this, many enablers also started worshipping him and created a religion based on him to get on his good side. Due to all this reaffirmation in his beliefs, he started thinking he is a god. Jesus Reborn. In the wake of Chris being arrested and incarcerated on a charge of incest, viewers watched with bated breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Many thought that time in jail would serve to humble Chris, imparting unto him an inescapable awareness of his wrongdoings, and forcing him to understand that actions have consequences. For over a month, there was near total radio silence, and, for a time, people believed that perhaps Chris had finally had a reckoning and being forced to face reality. On September 19, 2021, these notions were swiftly put to rest, as Chris added another layer of delusion to the many that grew from his unchecked long-term psychosis. While not the first jail letter written by Chris, that being a brief plea for money in August shortly after his incarceration, the message sent on September 19th was wildly different in both tone and in content. Reading more like a sermon than a cry for help, Chris declared himself a reincarnation of Jesus of Nazareth, as he defended his actions and fulminated against those who had betrayed him. Having come to view himself as the single most important being in existence, christening himself as the real Player One, the effective center of the universe. Many of the messages that followed, sent to assorted acquaintances, old friends and YouTube channel owners, among others, served to demonstrate the scope of his new outlook. Chris would use letters to elaborate on his feelings towards others to provide lore for his confusing, self-made pantheon, all the while assuring his readers of his godly status and insisting vehemently that the dimensional merge was coming even closer, nearing completion by his hands, and insisting with equal vehemence that his actions towards Barb were not criminal, but an act of soul bonding, designed to protect her and prolong her life. Chris's belief in his own godhood became such that he eventually convinced himself that he would simply be released from jail without consequences to tend to his duties, following the completion of the merge, a belief he held up right until his last communique prior to his transfer. How this dramatic change in his mindset occurred is uncertain, though it is commonly believed that combined with Chris's existing fascination with the dimensional merge and inability to cope with consequences of his actions, Chris's voracious readings of the Bible in isolation have served to instill within him a deeply religious fervor, driving him to create a nonsensical mythology that he has since used as yet another coping mechanism, one that threatens to completely destroy what tenuous ties to reality he still has left. It also serves as a logical next step to Chris's delusions of godhood. Given that Chris already treated himself as a messiah, or his fantasy world, he simply added a reincarnation element into it, and joined a list of many other delusional people who believe they are Jesus of Nazareth reincarnated. Since leaving jail, an interaction between a cashier at Earthbound Trading Co. and Chris indicates that he still believes that he is Jesus, given that he signed a receipt as J. Christ Chan Sonichu. Such a move is unsurprising, given that Chris tends to stick with what he believes in as long as he feels it benefits him.